Hey, what's up? You're tuned into The Cutting Room, the show where we talk to industry leading marketing professionals about their content marketing philosophy, process, and pregame before they edit an article live. I'm your host, Tommy Walker, and we're doing something just a little bit different today. I wanted to do an AMA primarily because I've been scheduling a lot of conversations with folks over these last few weeks and have been having some really amazing talks. But to do this at scale and to answer any questions about freelancing or career path or automations or workflows or any of the number of things that are I'm really passionate about, I figured doing this AMA would make it very easy to have these conversations with folks and to really just have a back and forth conversation. This has been a lot of fun doing this, and I've had a lot of interest in just talking to people. So, with no further ado, I suppose the first thing that I'll do, just so we can kick the conversation off, is tell you a little story about how this career started, because it's been a wild, wild story. And when I was talking to people on LinkedIn about it, this was the thing that they were interested in hearing about the most. So I started my career after getting fired from a retail job over a pair of pants. To keep it brief, the it was one of the worst weeks I had ever seen. There was a major ice storm happening in New England, and in the span of a 24 hours, I had gotten into a car accident. I had locked myself out of my house, and there were blackout conditions across almost the entire New England region at the time. And it was a holiday season, so things were getting a little busy at the retail job. And having explained this to my manager, right, after going into work, they had said, okay, that's fine. And I said I needed to borrow an outfit off of the floor, the sales floor, just so I could have my uniform. And he said that was fine. He was really distracted from some other stuff that was happening because it was the holiday season. And essentially, after getting that permission and selling a bunch of stuff and setting a bunch of records for our district, 2 weeks later, I had gotten fired. And the rationale there was they know I didn't steal anything, but they said I was fired on the grounds of it looks sketchy. And I said the manager knew that it was happening. And they said, yeah, he doesn't recall having that conversation. So, being the time that it was, we were in the recession. It was 2008, 2009. I had said either I can try to pound the pavement and get another $9 an hour job, or I can start going into business for myself. So I had gotten my laptop, which was cracked from corner to corner, and had started just researching and researching and researching and researching. Now, I had worked as a link builder a few years before, but everything had changed in that period of time. That's when Facebook started to open their doors to the public. Content marketing was a phrase that was starting to emerge. Social media was becoming a much bigger thing and taking it a lot more seriously. So I would spend 18-hour days literally cramming my head with information and falling asleep at the keyboard, a little puddle of drool, just to give a little visual there. And I crammed as much as I possibly could. And within the first 2 weeks, I had gotten my first client. And from there, over the span of about 4 years, built out a freelance career, had some amazing support from my wife, my now wife, along the way. She would come and hang out with me and keep me company while I was working very, very hard. And um, and after the span of 4 years, there was a situation which led us to a place where I really needed to hustle because I had had a client that was not paying on time, and I needed to pivot what my business was doing. So I started writing for this company called CXL. A lot of people know Conversion XL. I became the editor over there eventually after getting told I was the number one and number six most trafficked articles on the site. From there, I was recruited into Shopify, which I then quickly moved over to the Shopify Plus department. Was there, I was employee number 14, first marketing hire. And when I left, there were 300 employees on that side, and I saw them to the first 1,500 customers. And then after that, I moved on to become the global editor in chief at QuickBooks, where I ran content for 16 markets and had 40 plus contributors across different disciplines. So social, email, SEO. all of those different areas. And it was very cross functional and very collaborative. And then there was a massive layoff. And from that layoff, we had 7% of the entire company got laid off. So over 700 people. And I had said, again, I didn't want to put my career and my career trajectory in the hands of anybody else. So I started my own business shortly thereafter. And in that time, in the past 2 years, I've worked with companies like LinkedIn and Twitch and GoDaddy. And really, that's sort of the brief journey of where everything's been in this very short, it's been like 17 years now, period of time. And I've seen it all. I've seen a ton of stuff along the way, working as a freelancer, understanding what that hustle is, going to a high growth startup like Shopify at the time, and then moving into the old guard, sort of established business and seeing what that culture is like. And because of that, I've created, or I've had a lot of perceptions and thoughts on what the entire spectrum of what online marketing looks like for these different types of businesses and styles along the way. So that's kind of what I wanted to do with this AMA is ask any questions and answer any questions that have come up and lend a hand to anyone who might be interested in learning. Okay, so we actually have a handful of people on right now already. So I'm getting asked here, what were some of the books, blogs, podcasts, or even mentors that influenced my content marketing and learning the philosophy over the years? So that's a great question. I'm going to break this up into two different sort of sections. So when I was in cram mode, I was very desperate. And one of the first things I Googled after not being able to figure out what it was that I needed to do to become successful, I actually Googled how to become an overnight success. And I came across this video by Chris Brogan, who was on the rise at the time. And it was very inspiring because he was talking about what it took to become an overnight success. And he was walking out to his car and talking about things like overnight success doesn't slack, overnight success doesn't watch TV, overnight success, gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And a lot of these things had really stood out to me. And at the end of the video, he says, if you want to know what it's like to be an overnight success, and he pans his phone over and shows an empty parking lot. It was like 4 o'clock in the morning and it was completely dead. And that just kind of told me everything I needed to know about what was coming in next. So started with Chris Brogan. Then from there, I found Brian Clark, right, of Copyblogger, and started consuming the Copyblogger content like crazy. From there, I met John Morrow, who became one of my biggest influencers over time. And every time something cool and new happens in my career, I still send him an email and say, thank you for the help that I've given or you gave me along the way. He had started a guestblogging.com program, which basically taught how to get guest blogs with high value websites. So I wrote my first guest blog for problogger.com, then got to push that around to a bunch of different areas. And from there, started networking and talking to people. And as a result of all of that, started to build out this portfolio and started to build a name. And one of the first most influential books that I had ever read was an ebook by Julian Smith called The Flinch. And after reading this, it really had inspired me to start doing something that was completely unique and nobody was doing this. Rewind back for a second. My first love and passion was acting, and I was a career actor for about 10 years and had graduated from a conservatory in New York. And when I got into marketing, I started to draw these parallels between my acting training and what online marketing was. So character analysis was brand building, customer service was improv, right? And there were a number of these types of things that drew this really great parallel. And because we were at this point in time where brands were allowed to interact with real people in real time, that helped me to create this really unique perspective. Flash forward back to the flinch. When I was looking at the space, I had understood, or I started to see, that there wasn't a lot of stuff that was super entertaining, right? A lot of people were saying, if you have questions, do it on a webcam, and when you uh, start doing videos, right? Just do videos, and all you have to do is talk into a webcam, and that's all that people need. And I said, no, that's not really that interesting. So I created this show called Inside the Mind, which we took internet marketing advice for the internet generation, and we did all sorts of crazy, silly things on it. If you want to check it out, it's on my old channel. You can just type it in Inside the Mind, Tommy Walker. And we do things like have a little Tommy on my shoulder and crazy animations. There was a dinosaur at one point that bit my head off and confetti came out of my neck. Like, it was just crazy, and very low budget, but really fun to do. And that sort of took off and created this portfolio. And yeah, from that, it was just this really authentic place that I started to come from. And I hate the phrase be authentic, but it was this really authentic place that allowed me to create a voice that was uniquely my own, that would then create sort of this foundation for this really crazy and amazing journey that I've had along the way. So yeah, so the flinch was one of my biggest inspirations. My acting background was one of the things I fell back on, and Brian Clark and the Copy Blogger crew, and John Morrow, all of my biggest influences very early on in my career. All right, so wow, we've got a few questions here. That makes me very happy. Mark asked here, what's the first thing you know or you want to know when you engage with a content strategy client? Like the one thing they have to get right before to make everything else easier and better? That is a wonderful question. So for me, it all starts with research, right? When I was at Shopify, when I was um, and figuring out what the market was looking like for Shopify and creating a very distinct voice for Shopify Plus. When I was looking at building Inside the Mind, when I've been doing research for, or when I started this show, the research is the most essential piece, because once you understand what's happening um, in the market, what everybody's doing, what nobody is doing, you can create this signal, or you can start to create this codified approach to how you are going to engage with the market. So when I was at Shopify, I created something called the code, which basically was a set of rules that were how we were engaged. So opinions are BS. Don't talk, do the research. Don't talk down to the reader. Um, uh, uh, 3 drafts, right? Be persistent. These were all things that we were trying to do that nobody else was doing, and it was written in a way. It's almost this manifesto that was written in a way that communicated our vision and our mission, but also how we wanted to engage with people. And whenever I do a strategy now, or when I work with a different company to do a strategy, I still do the same thing. The first thing I do is create one of these, and I'll read probably 200 blog posts, right? I'll listen to every webinar that every competitor is doing. I'll watch as many videos as my brain can handle. Um, I'll read every ebook. And the reason is I want to get this stuff saturated. I want it in my bones, because when I create this document, that document starts to inform everything else, from how we communicate with the stakeholders internally, to how we write our job ads to hire authors, to really finding the right people and attracting the right audience and repelling the wrong ones, to make it so we're creating a signal that we're either for you or we're not. And if we are, then cool, come along with us on this journey. And if we aren't, well, thanks, but at least we're still gonna be top of mind, and plant our flag in your brain whenever it's time for you to think about whatever solution is that we're creating. Um, and then from there, I really try to map out internal networks and find out where information can come from. So, and where the blocks are. So, if your content team, for example, isn't getting information from the social media team or the email team or the PR team, how can we build these inroads to grab more information and more inputs that can feed creative content and know what's going to work, so we can have a much better hypothesis on the types of subject lines, the types of headlines, the types of structure, um, and how that's going to operate. So that's sort of the dual approach there. I don't know if that helps, but I think that's one of the things that I try to start with, and that's kind of always the jumping off point in the platform that I tried to build before we move into the actual creation of anything and the actual like strategy. Because it's so often I've seen folks say, let's just start creating stuff and getting blogs out there because we need to have that happen. And it's like, yeah, sure, but what's the premise? What's going to be different about what we're doing versus what everybody else is doing? And that's really why I start there. Let's see. So let's see. We have, what advice will I give to somebody who wants to pivot from fiction editing or other forms of editing into B2B SaaS? And how do you transition and land jobs? The transition is not one that I have a lot of experience with. I don't know if I can answer that question very intelligently on the transition part, but I can say that to find the appropriate jobs and to find opportunities to get in front of more people, there's an advanced site search that I like to do on Google. And it's basically in quotations. You type in whatever key phrase that you're trying to go after. So we'll just say customer service as an example, in quotes, then a space, and then in title, right? All one word, in title, colon, write for us. And what that's going to do is show you everything on the internet that has write for us in the title that is also based on customer service. And that gives you a really solid opportunity um, to find these opportunities, to find places that will take guest posts, and that gets your foot in the door, right? After you've started working with people for a little while, after you've started to understand what the flow is of the website and how they communicate and all of these other things, then you can get into this place where, hey, maybe I can give you some suggestions, right? Maybe you take a piece that's already been published and start editing those pieces, right? What's already been published, and how can you start to increase the quality of what the overall site is about? When I was writing for a website called Unbounce, they found that the posts that I was putting out there, they were so much more researched and structured a little bit better and stuff like that on their site. And I tried to push the quality of the overall website further. And then when it came time to say, when you're building that credibility, then you're able to say like, hey, let's take this relationship a little bit further. That's exactly what I did with CXL. And that's how the rest of the craziness with the recruited to Shopify and going to QuickBooks, like how that all ended up working out. So I think the biggest thing for me is just establishing that credibility and then taking it from there, right? Learning the ins and outs, pushing the standards of that site further, and then moving on to that next part of the relationship with that next person. All right. Aaron says, I'm a huge fan of the code. One, can you explain it to anybody who might not know about it? And two, even more importantly, how did you make it practical to content creation? The code is, and he asked this a little bit while ago, and I kind of touched on this a little bit, but the code is the set of standards for how we communicate with the market. And it's this understanding of, and I'll share the document maybe a little bit later, but it's this understanding of who we're creating for, what we're trying to do, and the message that we're trying to go after. So what this does with our talent is it allows us to get on the same page as far as what the expectations are. And it gives me a reason or something to refer back to when there's an edit that needs to be made, right? So, for example, it was written initially as a way to avoid well, technically this information is good, but we'd say it like this. And that's something that we could always have that to lean back on, right? You're violating rule 13, right? Or you're violating rule 10, or this isn't up to standards with what we're trying to accomplish here. And this allows us to always build off of that and try to always meet the standards of what this particular code is about. And then even more importantly, how do or did I make it practical to content creation? I don't think the code on its own is practical. And I mean, you have this experience more than I do being on the other side of it, Aaron, but I don't think the code on its own was practical for content creation, but I think it gave us something to discuss, right? And if it's something that we're falling back on and it's something that we're on the same page on and your interpretation of it is what it is, it gives us something to discuss and that becomes practical, but more in the application of on a piece by piece basis. So I think that's what I would do to to say how that's practical. And again, this is one of those things where it'd be better if I could just show it. So I'll send it out in the replay for this. Um, but it's probably one of the most foundational and most important documents that has ever been created with any strategy that's been put out there. Let's see. So Ryan asks, "Hey Tommy, what are your top tips for content ops and editorial workflow management?" Map out the steps first, right? So before getting into any software, right? Software needs to serve you. You don't need to serve the software. I try to map out the steps. So everything from idea to outline to publishing to assign to in production, trying to understand what those individual steps to the life cycle of a piece of content is going to be. And then from there, through automation, through extensive automation, I try to find out who the different stakeholders are with each step of the process. One of the problems that I've always found with workflow and ops is that it's always requiring the person to go to the operational platform rather than the information going to the person. So, for example, if I need somebody with design help, right? At what point can they start coming into that process? And in my mind, the designer can probably come in once I get the first draft. So the automation that would be associated with that would be um, when a draft hits review, then it gets sent to your editor and it gets sent to um, and then it gets sent to the designer at the same time. Both of these people can work concurrently. And then once that step is done, they move it to the next step in the process. And needs to get notified next, there's an automation that does that. The way that I like to think about it and the way that I really try to map it out is it's more like a Formula One pit crew than it is a production line. And I think that's one of the most important things to keep in mind is with any ops from a conceptual level is where are the things that people can come in and when do they need to get off and what is the best way to get these people to work. So the automation, for example, might send the information over to Slack or over to email, depending on how they like to get the information, rather than asking them to come to the document itself. And yeah, it's just a matter of understanding who your stakeholders are and at what point they need to be brought into the process. And then that's the foundation for pretty much all ops. Let's see. Thank you. It says I do amazing work with the content studio. It is a team effort. There are people you don't see who are behind the scenes. My wife has also produced every single episode. She does all the editing for a lot of the trailers and for the full episodes now. And that saves a tremendous amount of time, but she is also responsible for a lot of the quality that comes out. And then we also work with a designer out in Pakistan. His name is Hassan. Absolutely incredible. He does all of the graphics for the show. Everything you see in the replays with the lower thirds and all the promotional stuff. That's all. I'm the ideas guy and the person who's in front of the camera, but really a lot of the work that goes into the stuff that's here. We all work really hard, but it wouldn't be able to do it without the people who are also behind the scenes here. Let's see. Yeah. Also, Ryan says, also, how can content managers get more buy-in for their programs from senior leadership? How have you successfully made the case for more budget in the past? Um, that's a great question. It's twofold, right? It comes back to the research. So you've got results and there's research. Obviously, managers want to see, the higher ups want to see the results, and you've taken, bets based on the work that you've already done and how those results look. But then the other and the more conceptual side of things is when you try to do something that's a little bit more experimental. And that's kind of where I like to live and operate, and sometimes that's gotten me in trouble. But the thing is with the research that I've tried to do, it's a matter of going, hey, yeah, nobody else is doing this, or somebody's trying to scratch the surface on doing this, but they're not doing it in a way that's going to stand out. Here's the research and here's the supporting reasons as to why this I think will work. It's a very strategic bet. Here's the gap, right? And this is what we'll need. And the other part of that is thinking about and this is one I learned at QuickBooks, was the crawl, walk, run approach. So you do the tiny little experiment, see how that goes. If that starts to gain some traction, then you start to walk and then you start to run. Good example with this show, actually. I have to do this for us now. Um, is This was a crazy little experiment. We had um, we had an idea at the very beginning. We did a lot of research. I talked to probably 4 dozen people, sent out a bunch of $10 gift cards to Starbucks, and uh, just sent out a lot of cold requests on LinkedIn. Right. And I'm not really a huge cold request person. I hate doing cold, but from those conversations, we learned that there was this gap where people weren't able to look over their shoulders of their peers. There wasn't a lot of information for mid-career content marketers, and we wanted to be able to tap on the shoulders of people that we knew, or tap on the shoulders of people that I've known, that I've gotten to have relationships with over the course of my career, and then say like, hey, how do you work? Right? Because this is stuff we just don't get to see. And then we do it in this live format because nobody's doing live, right? And now we're at the place where that was the crawl, right? We've seen some traction at this point. We've got people live in the audience right now, which I'm incredibly grateful for. Thank you. Um, and now that we're at this place where, okay, we've validated the idea and things are working, now I'm willing to spend a little bit more of my own personal money to to put some paid ads behind it, and turn it into a podcast, and do all of these other things that I'm totally willing to invest in now that I know that it's working a little bit and have some very solid assumptions about what will happen next. And then when we run, I have no idea what run looks like, but the walk is sort of that next step, where we can start to accelerate everything that's going on. Let's see. So I have, uh, we have on here actually somebody who would like to come on to the stream itself. Courtney, if you want to do the go live section on the stream, I'll bring you on. And while we're trying to do that, let's see here. So, next question is how to transition from a full-time job to full-time freelancing, especially when one is an early stage professional. I don't know. I've never done it. It's always been out of survival mode that it's had to be for me. So again, I started with getting fired over pants, so I had no job to lean back on, and then after I started going on my own again, um, it was after a layoff. So everything is just sort of for me like swinging from vine to vine, at least in the beginning, and always a matter of survival. That said, if I were to do it smartly, I would save up at least 3 to 4 months worth of expenses, moonlight on the side, do what I was talking about a little bit earlier with the site search, or the in quotes keyword, then in title right for us, and start to build out a portfolio on the side, work harder. Not like I'm not a hustle bro by any stretch of the imagination, but work a little extra hard to get a portfolio out there and then start charging. And then when you get to the point where you feel like you can, um, with your backup money as well as your freelance money, once that starts to balance out a little bit, or you're willing to take a little bit more of a pay cut and you've built out a solid pipeline, that's when I would say to make the jump. But again, I might not be the best person to um, answer that question, because every time it's just been a matter of like, I was kind of pushed into it, and everything's always worked out a little bit better after that as a result. How important is it to learn a style guide, APA, CMOS, when it comes to editing articles, blogs? I have no idea. I've never used a style guide. That might be probably one of the last things that's on my mind when it comes to any of this, and primarily because a lot of the grammar, conversation, like everything that we talk about, it's supposed to be fifth grade reading level, right? It's all supposed to be conversational, and oftentimes the way we speak and the way we converse does not fit to style guide. That said, it's going to depend on the job, right? If you're writing for a newspaper, for example, AP style guide might be important to know. Chicago Manual, that might be important to know. That said, I've got a couple of style guides on my bookshelf over here, that I've never ever looked at because I've never found them to be important. What would say are the top 3 skills to success as a marketer? Actually, I'm going to check over here for just a second here. All right, Courtney, we're going to bring you on the stream, and then we'll. It's not just going to be me talking to the camera. What's up, Courtney?
Hey, going.
Not too bad. Thank you for jumping onto the stream and being brave enough to come live.
Yeah, sorry, we work in Vancouver at the moment, so I'm in one of those phone booths. So it looks like I'm kind of in a studio here.
Very cool. All right. Well, what's up? What can I? Let's have some A's for me to A.
Yeah.
Does that
So
work? Yeah.
yeah. I think being an editor, that's right,
Yeah.
looking to pitch themselves to you. What are some of the things you
Mm-hmm. I'm not really great with taking pitches. I'll start there. And that is both in regards to the freelancers that I've worked with, but also with the show, right? This is another great example of that. And I'm not really great with accepting freelancers on a cold pitch. I've done it maybe twice, to be honest with you, in the entire time I've been doing this. Um, and it's because I have incredibly high editorial standards, right? We unfortunately haven't gotten the chance to like really dig into that together, but I will tear a piece apart. Um, that said, when I put out ads and the applications that I get, there are a couple things that I'm looking for, and the main one is actually, to answer that question a little bit more directly before I move on. The people that I have taken on from pitches, I want to see that there's an incredible amount of skill, right? Skill and craft is probably some of the most important things to me. And it's very easy to have the same style of blog post from, I want to know that the byline is going to be important, right? And if I can't have a distinguishing feature from the byline, and it's completely unique, then it's off the table for me. Just straight up. There's a lot of patterns in writing right now. There's a lot of, you know, content marketers sound like content marketers, and if it feels like this person has tourist knowledge, it's automatically rejected. And 9 out of 10 articles that have ever been cold pitched is that. That said, out of the ones that have stood out, there are 2 things that I'm really looking for. One, persistence, right? Because I'm a busy person, and generally speaking, I'm not trying to be a jerk by ignoring stuff. It's just my inbox can go fills up real fast. But then 2, um, willingness to be developed. I think the major thing with that is when I hire, when I put out a job ad, I ask for three of the most representative pieces of their work. Right? It doesn't have to be related to what it is that we're talking about. Just three published pieces that are the most representative of what it is that they do. And then I'll shortlist between 15 to 10, 10 to 15 people. And out of each of them, I have edited a deep edit on one of these already published pieces. Now, to me, and in my mind, there's no skin in the game, right? Like there's nothing there that says, you know, it's already been published. What I say has no effect on this final piece, right? That said, there have been people who have taken offense to those edits, not because, I'm mean. I just am blunt and honest. And there are people who are like really appreciative and accepting of the types of edits that I'll put out there. And it's that second group of people that is the most important to me because it shows that there's less ego involved, and more willingness to work on the craft and work on the work. And I've worked with some really amazing authors who our job, once we start working together, is to continuously push each other to be better, right? The better you become as an author, the better I become as an editor, because I always have to find something to feel like I'm satisfied pushing my skills to the limit. So I think that's really it. It's the combination of persistence and willingness to take edits. And then I think the third most important thing, the most important thing is, do we gel? Right? Like after we've done the editorial process and we've gone through that, if that person seems like, hey, wow, this was really great and I see where you're at, and I've sent them the code and they know, sort of what those standards are. If they're excited by all of that, then it's like, let's get on a call and see how we vibe, right? I'm not the type of person. I've never done the like, hey, let's write a test piece, because I freelanced for a long time, so I know that test piece is just a waste of time. It can be a very big waste of time. And I think that it's usually not representative of the work that we would do together long term, because there's no real investment from anybody in on either side of that relationship. And that is very, very different and maybe a little bit riskier than some other moves. But at the same time, um, I've had a really good success rate. I've only had like maybe in the entire time that I've been doing this, I've had very few people, maybe two or three, that fell through the cracks of, hey, this isn't going to work out. Because that entire process is, again, it's always about attracting the right people and repelling the wrong ones to me. And we just got to set those filters up in place to make that happen.
That's, yeah, super thorough. Makes so much sense. Speaking of harsh edits, the
Yeah.
content studio, you've obviously had some amazing guest appearances. What are your
Yeah.
networking secrets?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm actually super duper socially awkward. Like you've met me in a more private setting here, but I'm super awkward when it comes to this stuff. And when I was getting my first initial batch of guests, it was just people that I've met through my career, and somebody saying, "Hey, you need to meet this guy," and all of that. I mean, it's just, but like I'm also like very much me, just all the time. So it's not for everybody. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have any really good networking, secrets there. It was the most uncomfortable thing in the world for me to do, reaching out on LinkedIn to people that I didn't know and had no connections with, but because I was like, what companies do you work for? Right. And that's what I was starting with. And then from there, just saying like, hey, here's what I'm doing. The premise of the show, right, to go back to the research that we were doing and coming up with the premise of the show was interesting enough, I think, to people to say like, yeah, let's take a bet on this because that sounds cool. And then we get on a call and it's like, yeah, this is really neat. Like, and I've had really good luck with meeting people who our personalities do well together. And part of my experience as an actor, I think, plays a role in being able to match energy. Um, and that's something that I actually focus on sort of on the side, I've looked at a lot of like negotiating master classes and stuff like that, where it's like there's sort of an art form, I think, to matching energy and having those types of conversations. Um, but I would say that I think for me in this show in particular, it's the premise first, and then the rest of it's just conversation.
Yeah. Well, that's your secret. That's your networking
Yeah,
secret. Because
yeah, I guess
it
that. Yeah,
doesn't mean, yeah, it doesn't mean like you necessarily knew the people on a super personal level, but having that is what piqued their interest. So I guess the takeaway from that for me is that don't be afraid of still cold pitching, but you've
yeah,
got a good premise to begin with, then yeah, it can work out.
yeah, and
I
that's
want
the
to take
thing that I think is. Oh, just I think that's the thing that's missing from a lot of cool stuff these days too, is that it's all you, you got to be able to plant a flag in somebody's brain. You know, I can very easily say this show is, and then sum it up in one little line, and it's like, oh, I get that. That makes sense, right? And and I haven't talked to anybody who says that doesn't make sense. I don't get it. What's going on? It's kind of like, no, that's cool. Let's talk, and then it's like, oh, it's yeah. Anyways, I could ramble on about that for a while.
Yeah. Last question from me. So obviously I've also taken courses, which is fantastic. What would you say is I guess the number one thing that everyone should be automating processes?
I don't know. It's so circumstantial. Um, if you're working with a larger group of people with quite a few stakeholders, then it's a matter of knowing what person comes in at what step in the process, and then hitting them up. Making sure that when that part of the process comes along, making sure they get a Slack message or an email or however they prefer to get notified. That's their thing. I think that's the foundation of every automation that I've ever put together. Like that's the starting point. Um, because the information exchange is probably the hardest thing with any larger organization. With me, some of the more recent automations that I've put together were booking Calendly links and sending myself and you've seen this before, sending myself a text message when I've booked a Calendly link or somebody's booked my link. Um, so, so I know that, hey, somebody's booked. And then also I get a notification about an hour and 15 minutes before, so I don't miss the meeting, because I'm just personally, my head's all over the place at all given points in time, if you haven't noticed. So those are the things that I think are the most important to automate. Or what are the things that, if I were to sort of answer the question a little bit better, is what are the things that you're really not good at keeping up with? And then automating those things. So for a freelancer, it might be invoices, right? Might be terrible with sending out invoices on time. Automate that. It might be notifications of when you have a meeting coming up, right? Automate that. Uh, that's the type of thing that I try to look at, is like, what are the things that I'm personally really terrible at? And then how can I automate that to either remind myself or make sure that it still gets done? Let's see. So if anybody else wants to come onto the stream live, there is a pinned link at the top of the YouTube chat where you can click on that. You'll be brought over to Riverside, and I can bring you live on the stream. Let's see here. And thank you, Courtney, for coming on. I don't quite know how to get you off the stream now, but we'll figure it out.
Shall I press leave?
I think so. That would probably do it. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see. So we've had Courtney asked in here, talked about the amazing guests. Pitching for freelance writers. What gets my attention as an editor? Yeah, it goes to what I was saying just a little bit a second ago, because Courtney, you and I were just talking about this. It's about the persistence, and it's also, I mean, headlines, right? What's your subject line look like? Is it something that's going to grab my attention and stand out in my inbox? And is it concise enough? Do I get the premise of what it is that you're trying to put out there and what you're actually trying to pitch me? Those are the things that I'm really looking for, because I'm always trying to increase my skills and improve my game. And is there something that you're going to challenge me with that will help me improve and do better? Let's see. So, what do I look out for in pitches? I've become a pretty good. Uh, I was a pretty good finding BS detector, and if there's people that I work with who feel very opportunistic, I think that's the thing I look out for the most is the self-serving nature rather than the collaborative nature. So I look for ego, I look for opportunistic language, and things that are more self-serving than they are audience-serving, and that's I think what I look at the most. So Ryan asks, what is your process for when you have a piece languishing on page 3 or 4 that you feel is first page worthy? What do you look for and how do you fix that? Ryan, are you trying to come onto the chat right now as well? To answer that question, okay. To answer that question, there are a couple things. I think the first one is always build out more internal links, right? I think that's the first step. I did this with a page that we wrote for a client. It was very competitive, how to build a website or something crazy like that. And we ended up building, now they had a huge catalog of content, but we ended up building out like 100 internal links to this particular page. And we saw it shoot up from, I think, page 93 to the first position on, or not first position, but like fifth position on page 1. So never underestimate the importance of internal links. But the other thing that I would consider is um, looking at the Google Search Console data to see how other people are, like how they're getting to this, and how can you start to incorporate those things in there a little bit more. I don't really have a great answer for that, but internal linking has always been my most successful sort of approach to that. Let's see. Bonnie asks, who was your first hire at Shopify Plus? He's not here anymore, but Aaron Orendorf was my first hire at Shopify Plus. I had a handful of freelancers that we were working with together. So there was Nick Winkler, who had won an Emmy before. He was the person who did our case studies because he was a journalist in a previous life. Aaron actually was an interesting case because he had this Twitter post that he automatically tagged me in this Twitter thing where he had written a piece for Conversion XL, and the tool that he was using at the time, it's now defunct, but it would take anybody who was linked to, and it would find their Twitter handle and say, hey, I wrote, I mentioned you in this particular piece. And it was this automated tweet that said, hey, I mentioned you over here. And I said, cool. I read the piece. I was like, and I responded, right for me. And then we hit it off, and it was a great conversation. And then, yeah, we ended up working together for a long time. And then I said, hey, how would you like to come work with us full time? And one thing led to another, and he ended up becoming my first hire. Nick became my second hire. And then after I left Shopify, Aaron took over my position and blew it up and did everything that I never could have done on my own. So absolutely incredible, the work that we had done together. And one of my favorite working experiences to date. I love Aaron. Not going to lie. I'll say that publicly. Why not? Let's see. We've got about 10 more minutes left, and I would love to answer anything else that anyone else has to ask. And if we don't have any other questions, I don't really know. I don't know what we'll do next. It's been a lot of fun, though. And it turns out half of my face has been on camera this entire time. Yeah. Yeah. So I think if there's going to be any major takeaways here, it's that I am always trying to push my skills to the next level. I am always trying to make things just 1% better. I really do believe in the power of marginal gains. And doing things just slightly better than before, because these things all begin to add up, right? You start to get a little bit better at every single one, and you start to practice these techniques and skills that really help you stand out among the crowd. So one thing that I would look at, right, if you're an author, is how can you make headlines a little bit more powerful? How can you create little tweetable moments inside your body copy? How can you uh, make your images just a little bit more compelling? What are these tiny little things that you can do and practice very intentionally? Practice those techniques very intentionally to make things better for the next time and the next time. Because when you start doing that, you're really able to get this into your bones, and eventually it just all starts to come together, right? We're doing very small things with this show on the replays. We're improving our lower thirds, for example. We're making sure the editorial is a little bit smoother, and it just makes it that much better every single time. How did I get so good at editing? I can't take credit for some of the stuff that's been coming out recently. I do some of the work, but not all of it. Um, it was a matter of timing. When I first started, I kind of just reverse engineered what I saw from TV, right? As an actor, one of the things that we had to study were beat changes and the timing of pieces. So if you watch a scene in a movie, for example, one of the best things you can do is just snap or take a tick on a piece of paper every time the camera changes within the span of a 1 minute scene. And what that does, when you start to practice that very intentionally, you get a sense of timing, and you get a sense of what's being used and what's not being used. I studied music for a very long time too, so understanding the beats and the rhythm and how all that works together kind of gives you a sense of where to cut, um, and and that sort of applies across the board, because I imagine we're actually talking about video editing, or not video editing. We're talking about editing inside a document. Uh, and when I look at the document side of things, it's kind of something very similar, actually. What are the beats that we're doing? How is the structure? Is this telling me a story that I can fully comprehend? Um, what are the things that are not being said? Right? How can I? What are the questions that I have along the way? I'm always asking, why is that? Why is that? Why is that? And once I'm able to answer those questions or get a really thorough idea of what it is that we're actually trying to say, those developmental edits are the things that make it so it's a little bit more interesting to read. Um, and again, it comes back to what's everybody saying, what's nobody saying, and then how can we say it a little bit better? Yeah, cool. Well, if there are no other questions, I want to say thank you, everybody, for coming out. This has been an absolute pleasure. I am incredibly grateful that you would even take the time to sit here and listen to me ramble about this stuff. And I hope that it was helpful. I really do. I genuinely hope that this was valuable to you, um, and that we can do this again sometime. If you're not, here, I got to do the pitch now. If you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please do so. We are doing these shows every single week. We put a lot of love into these and the replays, and we're only trying to make these better and better and better. So, again, thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.